Now that the truck's all painted up and ready to go, I decided I'm going to just refinish the fuel tank and the rear axle while they're out. It's the best time to do it. Then when it goes together, it'll just be done. So I'm going to pump the fuel out of the tank. I've already got it going. I have a jumper battery down here, a little harness I made up, and I've tapped into the correct polarity on the fuel tank connector. So this is running the pump right now. It's going into these fuel cans. You can see right now it's running. There's roughly, I would say, 8 or 9 gallons in here, because last I remember the gauge was showing about half tank. So I'm going to get this thing fully pumped out, and then I'm going to fill it with water just to make sure it's not going to explode, no sparks or nothing while I'm doing any grinding or wire wheeling on this tank. I've got a fire extinguisher here too, just in case something bad happens, but it'll probably take a little while for this to fully empty, and then I'll finish stripping the rest of it apart. With the fuel tank drained out and flushed, I'm just letting it dry now in the hot sun. So I'm going to focus my attention to the rear end. I need to start by draining the gear oil out of it. I have just a scissor jack holding it level so I can get to the drain. I want to let this thing drip for a little bit while I'm pulling all the other parts off it. I'm going to try and strip everything off that I can possibly get off it, because I want to be able to grind this thing down and paint every surface that I can. And then I'll do the same treatment I did on the frame, where I do the rust encapsulator coating. Ooh. And then I'll do the top coat. It should look really nice when it's all done. There she goes. Yummy. A little bit of junk in there. Ooh. Sure, it's fine. This rear axle's been fully stripped down. I got everything off that I could except for the ABS sensors. They're kind of stuck in place. I'm not going to worry about it because they do work. But in the future, if I have to replace one, I know that they're going to have to be probably broken and then extracted. The inside looks great. It's lived in an oil bath its whole life, so it's nice and shiny in there. There was a little bit of debris in the bottom, but I got it all drained out, mucked out. I cleaned this mating surface and chased all the threads. On the inside you can't see anything, but on the outside around this diff cover where it's welded on, it has a couple of pinholes that have always leaked. So I have to cut this off, grind it down so I can fit on this. This is a replacement rear cover from Dorman. It's supposed to fit this model truck, but there are a couple differences here. These mounting points are slightly off. The lower is shifted over a little bit, but the top is way different. It's up here. I don't know if this is supposed to kind of bridge the gap between the different years of parking brake cables on the first gens because I know they're a little bit different, or if this will even work. Luckily it's very thick. This is about 150 thousandths or so. So if I had to, I can cut this off, grind it down, and relocate it so that it'll work like this original one. We'll see. I'm going to be able to get at these shock mounts that I made now and fully weld these on in place. And then once those are welded and this cover's welded on, then I'm going to strip this thing, get it wire wheeled clean as I can get it. We'll do the metal etch treatment, the rust encapsulator, and the black top coat, just like the frame. I'll also be doing the same to the fuel tank. Getting late. I'm trying to get this rust encapsulator coating brushed on so it can set up overnight. The rear axle earlier, I was able to get it cleaned up with a flap wheel and a wire wheel. I got as clean as I could. Then I took a cutoff wheel and cut the original leaky diff cover off. I got it cut all the way around the circumference. I ground it down flat and smooth. And I had a couple witness marks that I made to help me position the new one. So this is that Dorman one I talked about. It's really thick. Actually, I measured it. It's like 150 thou. The old one was, rusty, so it's a little bit thinner, but I think it was around 90. So this is quite a bit thicker. Nice and easy to weld. Lots of material there. I welded all the way around. Shouldn't leak anymore. I hope not. Once it was welded and cooled down, I did go over it one more time just to pretty everything up. And then I wiped both these things down with phosphoric acid, the metal etch, and let that set up. So they're masked off, they got a pre-prep wipe down, and they're ready to go. So I'm going to get these things painted up tonight. Tomorrow I'm planning on spraying the black gloss coat, make them look really nice, and then things can hopefully start going back together. It's the next day. It's been about 12 hours since I brushed on that rust encapsulator coating. It's dry to the touch and ready for a top coat. I've got my spray booth set up out here, as you can see. The tank is hanging from an old engine hoist that works out really well. I can get to all of the surfaces at once. The rear axle is sitting on an old pair of jack stands. It's multiple colors. I've used them for several projects. Works out really well. I'm just going to spray this the way it is and trying to get every area I can. The jack pad contact area, I'll just have to maybe touch up later. Not too worried about it really. So I'm going to mix up that coating and get to spraying. Dun, dun, dun. There it is. It's been a couple of days since I painted it. It was a very hot, sunny day, so I got to sit out there and bake on it, drive a lot faster that way. So now I'm able to start putting it back together. There's really not a lot here to do, not like the rear axle. So I'm just going to go ahead and get this done now. I do have all the new seals. I purchased those a while back. I did clean all the threads out here and here. And I also cleaned the inside of the tank out. There wasn't much in there, but I know it's really clean, so I won't have any trash in there when it goes back together. These are the old tank pads. They're placed where they need to go, but I'm going to use some contact cement and glue them back down. They were peeling a little bit, but I cleaned the backside really well. I didn't go that crazy on the front. Really not going to see them. I might wipe them down a little bit, but there's like a raised impression here. It's got kind of like a squared off corner, and that's actually kind of how these are lined up. I think that's what they were for, your reference. There's some in the front too, towards the front of the vehicle. Maybe that's for different models. I know that there's different tanks and straps depending on which Tacoma you have. If it's a short bed, standard cab, extended cab, or a 4-door. So there's also another one here that lines that up. So those will get glued down. I'm going to get all the stuff to put this back together. With the fuel tank finished up, it's time to move on to the rear axle. First thing I had to do was order these tools. I got them on Amazon for $160, I think. Not bad considering the cost of materials by the time you would source everything, you know, fabricate it, weld it. They're pretty nice. They're very thick. I think they'll last a long time. I probably only gonna need them this one time, but hey, I gotta get the job done, and it's cheaper to do it myself than send it to a shop. So these will allow me to get these bearings out of their housings down here and also press the new ones in. These are the original bearings. I've never had a problem with them. They have made no noise. They don't leak. Nothing weird going on back here. There is some play noted on the right side and the left. So they're gonna get stripped down. The backing plates are all rusty. I've got all the new stuff to rebuild them. So we're gonna do that next. Okay, so here's your axle. So what it's gonna look like when you pull it out of the rear end. The first thing that they want you to make note of is some distance on how far this spacer and ABS ring is pressed on. So I just measured the machine surface, the shiny part here, from there to the top. And it was about just under 5 millimeter or 187 thou. So that's just something to write down. So I guess when you put this back together, you can press it on the same distance. Next thing you got to do is to knock out one of these. These are basically studs, like you'd find in like a wheel hub. So you're going to drive one of them out. You can use a hammer or an air hammer. And the reason for that is because this tool will not fit in there unless you knock one of those out. So I'm going to just use my air hammer. And I'm going to hit it real quick. It does a good job. Bam, see? That's out of the way. Now you can slide this down and under. And when I put this into my press, it's going to grab this, and when I push the axle down, this will stay and pull right off it. Now I've got the tool. It's hanging by this ring on these plates. It's sitting on my press. This is just a cheap 20-ton press that I bought from Harbor Freight like 20 years ago or something like that. Still working pretty well. You're going to press down on this axle shaft, and that's going to start pulling this spacer and tone ring off, just like that. It's going. Ta-da! Alright, so that's done. You can slip this out. I'm going to slide off this spacer and the tone ring. They sit on top of each other just like that. And once they're out of the way, you'll be able to see the bearing right here a little bit easier. And then you'll see that there's another spacer underneath it right there. And make sure you note that there is a taper to it. See, so there's a tapered end. The square cut end goes against the bearing. There's also the clip I was talking about. It's a retaining clip down here. It helps to have the right pliers. Got to get that off next. Here's that retaining ring. I actually used a modified pair of pliers just to get it past the lip. And I can show you guys. It's just going to slide off of here. Okay. But having the right retaining pliers where they are going to remove this style of clip is definitely less of a headache. So no need to fight it. Get the right tool. But you can get around it with other methods. So that's out of the way. Now that that's out, you got to take the other part of the tool, this thing here, and this is going to drop down using this bolt pattern that's on here. It's going to line up one way like this. And you got to reuse some nuts from when you took this out of the rear axle housing. You're going to put these on, tighten them down, and put it back in the press, because this is going to allow you to hold this in place while you push the axle shaft out away from the bearing. We'll do that next. Back in the press, now we're using this flange to support it on these plates. We'll start pressing down on the axle shaft, and this flange is going to hold this in place while it separates. This is probably going to have a loud bang. There's going to be a lot of tension on it. make sure that you took that E-ring or that retaining clip out so that it will come off, or you're gonna have a real bad day. Okay, this is where it gets a little bit fun. Oh boy. You can hear it, a lot of tension. It's gonna, ooh, there it is. That's what you want. Now it's coming apart. There's a lot of tension on that. That's why I think it's really important you use a press and don't try to bang this thing out with a mallet or a sledgehammer or something stupid like that. It's just a lot better way to do it. This is the proper way. You're gonna push this all the way through, and it should drop out the bottom. And we're pushing on the axle, so the axle is coming out. You can't see it, but it's pushing down. And almost there. That's it. Okay. Now that's weaseled back out of the press. This is loose. I'm gonna get this tool off of here. Pull these nuts back off. The studs. Ta-da. Lift this guy off. Look at that. The bearing actually pulled out of this one. The other one it didn't. It stayed within the bearing cup. And then I had to press the bearing out separately. So I was going to show that, but I guess I'm not really going to be able to do that now. Although this is, there it goes. It just tunked a little bit. Okay, this comes off. Note the lip. This lip is facing the axle shaft flange, the outside towards the wheel. This one's actually got a little tension on it and some play in it. There's that other spacer that the clip was right on top of. So it has a square cut side and then this kind of tapered side. That tapered side's got to face the E-clip. So make sure you note that. But that's out, and then this will come off. Again, the other side did not come out that way. The bearing was stuck inside of here, and I had to press that separately. I actually put it, I drove all these studs out first, flipped it over in my press, and then from this side, I had a tool. I'll grab it. I had just this stack of spacers that fit perfectly on the inside of here, and it pushed on that bearing from this side, and it pushed it out the back. So that's the only difference. You could also just tap it out probably with a hammer at that point. I don't think it would do any damage. It's an old bearing, and it doesn't appear to be a super tight press fit in there. So I'm going to drive this out next. I'm just going to prop it up on a block of wood. It really doesn't take that much effort. It's going to take a little punch and a hammer and tap it out. It's almost out. There it is. Okay. There it is. So that's out of there. I got all new stuff for it. But I still need to take a few more things out from here. I've already done the brake hardware stuff. So you can see that's out. The wheel cylinder's out. That's if you're going to be replacing these entirely. You do need to save this bearing cup here unless you buy a new one of those too. So I'm going to reuse mine. They are rusty, but I'm going to get them cleaned up. These are the studs. I drove those out as well. So now I have to get this out of here. The other side is apart already, of course. That's what it looks like when it comes apart. It was stuck in there pretty bad. So, you know, like most of the stuff on my truck, things are rusty and stuck. So I actually put some heat around it here, and then I tapped it gently with a hammer, and I didn't do any damage to the cup, and it drove it out. So if you live in a nice clean state, you might not even be replacing your backing plates, but mine are pretty rusty. I've seen way worse, but these are pretty bad. I got new ones, and all this is getting rebuilt. So that will conclude the stripping down of the axles and bearings. So now all the new stuff can get cleaned up and put back together. After the axles were all stripped down, I cleaned everything up and started reassembly. I got the new backing plates from Toyota, so I went ahead and got the new parking brake mechanisms installed, and these wheel cylinders are not new. Those are the original. They were in great shape. They just need to be cleaned up. So they got sandblasted and powder coated this dark gray. They almost look like a fresh cast. I really liked it. New hardware on there. So that's done. This is the original bearing cup that was all rusty. I got that super clean. Also powder coated. This is more like a really hard wrinkle black finish. I've had good luck with this stuff in the past. It looks great. It's ready for its new bearing to be pressed in. The stuff here on the left is the original 250,000 mile Toyota factory parts. wheel bearing parts. Stuff on the right is this Beck Arnley kit. You can see it comes with everything you need, which is great. It's got all the seals and spacers and things. But honestly, I don't think, after looking at this stuff and seeing how the condition of the original stuff, I could have got away with just buying the bearing. And I would have been fine with it. Well, and seals. You need new seals. So I would have bought a high-quality Japanese bearing versus this Chinese bearing that came in the kit. And then reuse these spacers, because dimensionally these are the same. Nothing wrong with those. I don't think you could screw these up. They're just metal. One thing to note, you're going to see a wear ring on here. It's shinier. That's where it rode the inner axle seal here. I think it could probably go another $250,000 on that. It's not that deep, but it does bother me a little bit. Being dimensionally the same, swap them. Now this becomes a spacer on the bearing. This becomes the seal surface on the tone ring for that spacer. And that would solve that problem. The retaining clip that came in the Beck Arnley kit, it's not quite as wide, which whatever. But what does bother me is it doesn't have like a flat cut surface for your retaining pliers to grip onto. So it makes it harder to get off. I don't really like that. So I probably wouldn't use that in the kit. And I definitely wouldn't be using this ABS tone ring here, because although dimensionally it's the same, the tooth count's the same, these teeth are wider and they're super sharp. Like nothing has been deburred. There's even bits of metal hanging off here from the machine work. Honestly, if I was to use this, I probably would hit this with a file and knock all those off. So, you know, I've got some problems with this kit. It's nicely priced and it's complete. That's great. But if I was to do it again, I would buy a nice high quality Japanese bearing. You know, so we made it $250,000. I'm sure it'll make it, you know, it could probably go back in. If that's not saying quality, I don't know what does. Get yourself a good bearing. You would likely be able to reuse all this stuff. Like again, maybe swap these around because you didn't mangle the clip, and then just get yourself some seals. And that's kind of how I feel about the kit, and that's my plan. I'm going to use the seals, and I'm going to reuse these pieces and this bearing. Ready to start reassembling one of these axles, and unfortunately won't be able to use the new removal tools. There is no provisions for pressing the bearing on, so that does kind of suck. But it's not too bad using this other method. We're going to start by getting the axle all cleaned up. The sealing surface is ready to go. It's got a light coat of oil on it. We're going to be pressing the bearing down onto the shaft, so we don't want this sitting on a hard surface where it could damage these wheel studs. And also exerting force down this way may even possibly push these wheel studs out of the flange. We don't want that to happen. So what we need to do is to support the shaft on this face, and the best way to do that is just to set it on this whole drum right here. So this is going to lock in here like that. Now when we press down on any of the bearings on the shaft, that force will just go face to face with the drum. Next thing I got to do is get the new inner axle seal in. I started pushing it in. It's almost all the way in there now. So you just got to go around. It doesn't take a special tool. You can just kind of press this thing in by hand. Now it's fully seated in the bearing cup. You want to do that now because it's not going to be possible when you get it in there. Next thing is to, well, put yourself a nice light coating of bearing grease on there too, just to lubricate that seal. The bearing's got to go in next into this cup. Just going to put a light oil in there too. Just give it a little something. Make sure you note that this lip of the bearing has to go in this part of the cup, okay? It's very light press. I mean, it fell right in, obviously. So that's in place. Now, got to grab the backing plate. The backing plate here goes, well, let's see, this is how it all goes together. So this cup has to go like this, okay? So that when you put it on to the axle, it'll slide down the shaft like this. And that's why you got to get all this stuff together first. It's okay if this drops out. It just has to be in here because you won't be able to get it on. Now, the studs are not in here, but you can get those in later. I'm doing this on all new, so the studs, on yours might still be in the backing plate if you're just doing the bearing portion of this. But again, just make sure this is in and in the correct way. Now, you got to get yourself a tube. I happen to have this laying around. This is got an ID that's about 1.5 inches. Unfortunately, it's not quite wide enough to press fully down because this shaft down here is about 40 millimeter, which is a little larger, closer to 1.6 inches. So if you're going to get yourself a pipe or tube, whatever, to press this on, you're going to need something that's long enough to get you past the length of the shaft and that has a proper ID. I have this extra piece of pipe here that I'm using to press this bearing on. That's going to fit on here. This is going to fit over that. And I'm just going to take my mallet and I'm going to start tapping this in. Probably heard that thunk, maybe. That's metal on metal. That means that this is all the way on. That's solid. So now that bearing cup with that flange is hitting on that axle shaft. This bearing, you notice, is going to move a little bit. That's not a problem. It's going to be sandwiched on the end of the axle too when it's all bolted together. So this will be stuck, which is what happened to me on the last one. That's because that inner lip just barely touched on that wider portion of the shaft, but we got to put the collar on next. So like I said before, I'm going to use this one with the wear ring. It's going to go down here, and I'll use the other one that doesn't have any wear on it as my new sealing surface for the tone ring side. I'm going to put this one on. Probably heard that. That's all the way down. Now we're ready for the retaining ring. I'm going to drop that on. All I have is these modified crappy snap ring pliers. Should really get myself a pair of proper retaining ring pliers. Not helping me now, but these are. Pain in the butt, but it's doable. So if you're in a pinch like me right now, you could find a way to make this happen. Next, we got to put the tone ring on. This is the factory one. I got it all cleaned up. There's no debris anywhere in these teeth. It's ready to go. Originally, I took a measurement of how far this was pressed down onto here. It is possible to press it even deeper than it was. So it's not like this stops on top of here. Then you can just press it until it stops. You really do need to make sure that it's pressed on the specified amount. I don't know what the tolerance is, but I know that it was, I think, 4.75 millimeter, 187 thou from the edge of this machined area to the top of the spacer. And this spacer has a chamfer, and that chamfer goes out. That's kind of important because, the seal has to go on here, and this needs to be able to slip up, that seal needs to slip up past over that. So make sure you get that chamfer facing the right direction. You get this on next. I'm going to try and do both these at the same time. Okay. This is my piece of pipe. And the big guy. Just like that. Let's start with the big hammer. I don't want to go crazy because I don't want to go too far. I don't see any machine surface yet. Oh, starting to see it now. Now we go to the fine adjusting tool. Lighter taps. I think it's important to grab my caliper so I can measure this now. I don't think we're quite that close. Yeah, we need to go at least another millimeter. Could even just do the slide hammer action. The press on this part is far less than the press that's on the bearing in the shaft. Just take this off here. About 4 millimeter. Getting real close. $195. I went about 7th thou pass. I think we're fine. That's where it needs to be. We're good on that. Well, that was a lot of work, but the axles are rebuilt. Unfortunately, the wheel bearing portion took up a large chunk of this video, but I thought it was important to show the full process and what to expect while you're in there. I think wheel bearings are something that most people are going to be changing even if they're not rebuilding their truck. You know, they're going to eventually just have to do a wheel bearing as normal maintenance. So I think it's an informative video. Hope it helps some people out. Before this axle can go back under my truck, I still got to finish some stuff like the third bumper here. I got to go through some of that stuff and get that installed before the axles go in. And I got a couple more things I got to finish on the frame down here before the fuel tank go back in. So that'll be in the next video. And then we can start putting all this stuff in there and getting it complete. And I'm really looking forward to that. I'll see you in the next one.